and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma. The White House has revealed that Donald Trump is discussing a range of options to acquire Greenland, including the use of military. These comments come after European leaders issued a joint statement rallying behind Denmark, which has been pushing back against Trump's ambitions. After Maduro's capture and the US invasion of Venezuela, Trump has said that he needs Greenland, drawing concerns from across the world. Trump has also unveiled a plan under which Venezuela will turn over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States, which he says will bring prosperity to both United States and Venezuela. Here's what the External Affairs Minister of India, S. Jaishankar, had to say about the chaos that Donald Trump has created by way of capturing the country's head of government, Nicolas Maduro.
I don't particularly in public have a distinction between my official and personal. Anything I say is the same. But I think we put out a statement yesterday. So I would urge you to look at it. And obviously what happened, essentially, if I can sum up the statement, the long and short of the statement was that yes, we are concerned at the developments, but we would really urge all the parties involved to now sit down and come to a position which is in the interest of the well-being and the safety of the people of Venezuela, because at the end of the day, that is our concern, that we would want Venezuela as a country with whom over many years we've had very good relations. So we would like the people to come out well from whatever is the death.
I have with me Keith Vaz. He's the former UK minister, joining me from Dubai. Keith Vaz, quickly a response from you with regards to these sweeping statements that have been made by President Trump and now White House at this point of time, showing ambition to capture Greenland as well, and says that if needed, a military operation would be conducted.
Good afternoon or good evening from Dubai. If I was wearing a hat, I would eat my hat if there was any prospect of an invasion of Greenland by the United States. Because, as we know, the European powers, the EU plus Britain, have sent a very clear signal that Greenland is part of Denmark. And as an ally in NATO and as a member of the EU, as a member of every single international organization, the United States invades at its peril. It will mean the end of NATO, the end of the international order, a break between loyal supporters of the United States over centuries because of the desire to take over Greenland. Population, I think, 56,000. Now, anyone who knows their geography, and I admit I've not studied geography for quite some time, but it looks, according to the map that I have seen, not necessarily the Trump map, that Canada is even closer to Greenland than the United States. So Canada might want to say something about it if somebody tries to take it over. It doesn't mean that we're treating this lightly. You should treat what Donald Trump says very seriously indeed, because he has huge economic and military might, and he can deploy his troops and his air force and his army whenever he wants to. But whether the American people can stomach this is a different matter. On the list, apart from Greenland, is Cuba, Mexico, and, well, who knows where else. I'm surprised. As you know, he said he wants Canada to be the 51st state, but Canada is not keen to comply. But these are very serious times in international diplomacy. Looking back to my time when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister for Europe under Tony Blair in the British government, if any American president had said such a thing about Greenland, it would have sent us into running round like headless chickens with absolute anger. This is not what you expect from our greatest, strongest ally.
Andrew Latham, also on the show with me. Andrew, what are the state of affairs, the sentiment on the ground? Are people in America really perturbed after this Pandora's box that has been opened by President Trump? And of course, what choice does the European Union have? Yes, there have been a joint statement that has been released by European countries, including France, Germany, United Kingdom, Denmark and others, who have come together and opposed such a move if is initiated by the US government. But how do things stand in terms of legalities, in terms of the UN Charter?
Well, in terms of the UN Charter, there's no grounds whatsoever for the United States to annex anything, nor to engage in military activities the way it has against Venezuela. As Kofi Annan once said, just because something is illegal doesn't make it immoral, but in this case, both, obviously. The sentiment on the ground in the United States, as far as I can tell, is divided in the usual way. This is a polarized country, it's a polarized planet. If you love Trump, this is great, talk. If you don't, this is imperialism and colonialism and Trump insanity and so on and so forth. And the vast majority of sensible people in the middle are paying no attention to this whatsoever. They're getting on with their lives. I would say, because my co-panelist raised the Canadian angle, I would say this, that Canada and Greenland have had a territorial dispute over a little island called Hans Island for 50 years. And this is how they've resolved it. Every year, the armed forces of both countries get together and exchange bottles of whiskey and then go home. If you have a territorial dispute amongst friends and allies, that's the way to handle it. Similarly with the Northwest Passage through the Arctic, Canada claims it as an internal water, the United States claims it as an international water. They agree to disagree, and they found a way to navigate that. And the final point I would make, which goes to the heart of the issue, is that in 1951, Denmark, the sovereign power in Greenland, and the United States signed a treaty in perpetuity, renewed in 2000, that basically says the United States can put whatever military forces it wants, anywhere it wants, on the island of Greenland. It has the Tufik, formerly Thule, space base there. The United States has everything it needs in military terms already. It doesn't need to annex Greenland. That would be an intra-alliance disaster. It would be counterproductive. And in terms of accessing critical minerals, I would rather be doing that under Danish law than under American regulatory and legal regime.
Yeah. And also the fact that the Danish government and the Greenland administration has been more than happy to cooperate and sign deals with America in America extracting mineral reserves from Greenland. But keeping in mind, taking a look at American history, and its desire to occupy Greenland has not been the first one. Back in 1989 as well, there was a similar proposition. After the purchase of Alaska, there was a similar proposal that had been put forth by the then American president, which was desisted by Greenland. Why is Greenland so important and strategically important to America?
Well, as Andrew has just said, it really isn't, because they get everything that they need from an agreement with the people of Greenland, overseen by the government of Denmark. So there is no problem. The problem is wanting more, wanting to show America as an imperialist power. Now, why would a president who so severely criticized the invasion of Iraq, what Obama and his allies, the allies in Europe, did in Libya, why would he want to do this in Venezuela? Why would he want to even think of doing this? It's obviously to change the story. There is obviously another story that he wants to divert attention from. So he talks about invasion. But there will come a time, I agree with Andrew, I think that it is a polarized nation, but those in the middle will have their chance to vote in November this year, when the congressional elections. Worried about the congressional elections. As he said recently at the Kennedy Center when he addressed his congressman, there is a view that they're going to lose the congressional elections because attempts to change the boundaries in a number of states were not successful. As a result of that, if the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, then he's got real problems about the possibility of impeachment. If they take control of the Senate, then of course his power to appoint more Supreme Court judges will disappear. It will be something that the Senate will not ratify,
Yeah.
and therefore we'll have to wait for the next election. America will then be paralyzed. So we have this dreadful circumstance. And besides all this, you've got the war in Ukraine, which is continuing. You're emboldening the Russians, and the Chinese must be looking on and saying, all we have to do is wait, and the whole thing is going to collapse. This is serious. It's very, very serious, and it needs to be taken very seriously indeed.
Okay, all right. I'm going to shift my focus to some breaking development. I would like to update my viewers. As per Russia today, United States military forces are attempting to board the Russian flag tanker Marinera, which was formerly called Bella 1, in the Atlantic. Officials also confirmed to Reuters that the operation is currently underway. This is a developing situation. Andrew, let's hear it from you as well. Of course, the vessel that traditionally has been carrying Venezuelan oil, but right now the situation, as much as I know, is that this particular vessel was carrying Iranian oil, and Russia has been sending out Navy ships and submarines to protect the vessel. Of course, it's linked to the transportation of Venezuelan oil. How vulnerable are ships that are in the Atlantic with regards to the Americans keeping a hawk eye?
It's an interesting question and a significant development on the seas, as it were. It boils down to this. On the high seas, outside of any country's territorial waters, vessels have to be flying under a national flag. And they have to be flying under their legal national flag, not some other country's flag. And if they are not, under customary and written international law, they can be boarded, they can be inspected, and they can be seized. They are roughly, not exactly, but roughly the equivalent of pirates if they are flying without a flag. Russia has attempted to maintain a shadow fleet and has engaged in all sorts of gray zone or outright illegal practices to export its oil and to maintain the trade with Venezuela and Iran, and to keep all of that oil flowing. That's in its interest. And the United States and others over time have stepped up and have begun to enforce international law. This is not, it would be different if it were within the territorial waters of a country. That would be illegal. But
Yep.
if it's on the high seas, it's perfectly lawful, and in fact, it is law enforcement.
Absolutely. More information coming in. There's a joint statement that was once again released by the foreign ministers, this time of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway and Sweden. This has happened yesterday, declaring their commitment to preserving security, stability and cooperation in the Arctic as Nordic countries, Arctic states and NATO allies. The statement further reads, we have all taken steps to increase deterrence and defense in the region, including through new capabilities, activities, presence and increased situational awareness. We support NATO increasing its presence and vigilance in the region. We have substantially increased our investments in Arctic security, and we are ready to do even more in close consultation with the United States and other NATO allies. Security in the Arctic rests on respect for the fundamental principles of the UN Charter and the international law, including the inviolability of borders. The Kingdom of Denmark, including Greenland, is a founding member of NATO and has historically worked closely with the United States on Arctic security, including through the defense agreement between United States and Denmark from 1951. Coming back to you, Andrew, a situation of contrast where when US captured Maduro in a raid that was conducted just a few days ago, the European Union leaders weren't really verbose in their commentary. They spoke about the situation being concerning, but stopped at that. Never really raised the international convention, never really just talked about the UN Charter. Some of them, in fact, went ahead and supported the US President Donald Trump's action in taking control of Venezuela. How do you see this contrast when Greenland is under threat versus what happened in Venezuela?
Well, there are a number of obvious differences. Greenland is not being accused of narco trafficking, and there were no American bases and treaty relations with Venezuela the way there are with Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And the Monroe Doctrine, which is codified again in the U.S. most recent National Security Strategy Statement, really applies to Latin America. It's never applied to Canada or anything north of the American-Canadian border, including Greenland. So that's different as well. Now the Monroe Doctrine seems to have been extended. But the fact of the matter is on the ground that the United States does not need Greenland to annex Greenland to secure the Western Hemisphere. It arguably did need to do something with respect to Venezuela to expel Russian, Chinese, and Iranian advisors and otherwise minimize their influence in order to secure the Western Hemisphere, arguably. So the two cases are very, very different. One wonders about the motivation. Is it merely domestic politics? Is it merely Donald Trump trying to divert attention from domestic political news? Is there a more or less coherent vision, strategic vision driving Trump? If so, it's invisible to me, but perhaps there is. But in any case, it's not surprising that the Europeans have reacted the way they have with respect to Greenland as a key node in the Arctic security infrastructure of NATO. Canada, the US, and the Nordic countries being the big players there. Once upon a time, the Arctic was a zone of peace in the not too distant past. Now it's a zone of conflict. China and Russia are both pushing their influence and capabilities there. The Europeans and the North Americans are responding. It's becoming a real flashpoint, and Greenland is key to that, but Greenland is already secure within NATO.
All right, more breaking updates. Reports citing claims from the White House. U.S. oil executives are expected to meet the president at the White House on Friday to discuss investments in Venezuela. Keith, quickly coming to you about, of course, this is directly related to the potential that US President Donald Trump sees in being able to capture Venezuela. Talking about those 50 million barrels that are going to be brought into America, he has opened doors for more US oil companies that at one point of time had been deterred by the Venezuelan government to enter and set up base in Venezuela. How feasible do you think this is going to be?
I don't think it is going to be feasible because, as I understand it, and I'm happy to be corrected, the companies that are operating in Venezuela at the moment are American companies. There won't be others, but American companies are represented there. What has been most extraordinary is that the President of the United States has decided to consult oil companies and not Congress. I mean, are we living in America in a democracy or not? Surely you need to talk to the people who are elected as the representatives of the people, the congressmen and senators, and not the oil companies. Actually, I think the oil companies are taking a big risk. If they are involved in this issue and the rest of the world finds out who is involved and who turns up to the meeting and who is basically stealing Venezuelan oil, they might well begin boycotts of these oil companies. As we saw during the Gaza crisis, the boycott of companies like Starbucks and McDonald's had a profound effect on those companies. So I'm not sure whether these companies will want to be so actively involved. And they would also need the support of the Venezuelan government. There is at the moment a Venezuelan government that has been elected, a new president who has said that she is going to fight all the way. So if you go along to another country and steal their resources, then of course international sanctions will have to follow.
But the point is,
I mean,
how...
What is this? This is like...
Yeah, but the point is how effective are these international sanctions going to be? Because at the end of the day, United Nations is going to act on them, but it doesn't look like United States is in the is in a mindset to actually follow them, and they stand hollow because countries, particularly in Europe, are not really supporting United Nations. They are selective in their condemnation in fact, they are not even condemning US President Donald Trump in expressing his desire to take over Greenland. They are still striking a reconciliatory note, talking about how there needs to be cooperation, talking about international law adherence, but not really taking on Donald Trump straight on. Calling him an imperialist is what he is. So again, at this point of time, Europeans can't take on America and its President Donald Trump. They know this very clearly, and therefore a more subdued tone is what that has been adopted by the countries, including Denmark and Greenland. All right, more information. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has now posted on X. She has lauded Trump's operation to abduct President Nicolas Maduro, and she's written that President Trump promised the American people he would secure our borders, confront narco-terrorism, dangerous drug cartels and drug traffickers. Coming back to you, Andrew, about the actual reason, as has been spoken by a number of commentators and analysts, for US President Donald Trump to capture Maduro and take control of Venezuela is its oil reserves. Again, there is fear that is instilled in other South American, Latin American countries, whether it is Cuba or Colombia or Mexico, who may not be in a position and will not get supported by the world to fight their cause, fight their just cause, simply because Trump wants to take control of their minerals or their oil reserves or whatever is his next whim or fancy.
Yeah, I think the international commentariat has come up with three plausible explanations for why Trump did this. One of which is domestic politics, simply to divert attention away from the Epstein files and from the economic numbers at home, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that this is an act of American imperialism. This is about grabbing oil and critical minerals, and it's an old story about colonialism and imperialism. Okay, that's explanation number two. And the third explanation, which is the one that I think has most traction, is that Trump and his circle of supporters, including most importantly Marco Rubio, have come up with a new grand strategy for the United States, which says that the United States is not going to play global policeman anymore. It's not going to be everywhere fighting everybody about everything. It's going to focus on the Western Hemisphere, and it's going to exclude all extra hemispheric powers from having undue military influence, security-based influence, or economic influence. And that was why Venezuela was a flashpoint, because it had Chinese, Russian, North Korean, and Iranian advisors and investments and the Russian shadow fleet, et cetera, et cetera. The United States wanted that to end. Maduro wouldn't end it. He's been displaced, and now it remains to be seen if Delcy Rodriguez has the power to go along with this vision. I rather suspect, given the noises that she's making, that she will. So I don't think that oil, if there was no oil in Venezuela, zero oil, this still would have happened. Mm-hmm. If there were no Epstein files circulating in the United States, this still would have happened, because it's motivated by something bigger, more important, maybe wrong, but that's the motivation.
Okay, quickly taking a look at China's strong condemnation for the United States redirecting Venezuelan oil exports to Washington and away from Beijing. This after President Trump unveiled a plan to refine and sell up to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil stuck in the country under a US blockade. Listen into what the Foreign Ministry spokesperson of China said.
The United States has brazenly resorted to the use of force against Venezuela and demanded that America First be applied when Venezuela disposes of its own oil resources. This is a typical act of bullying, a serious violation of international law, and a grave infringement on Venezuela's sovereignty that also severely undermines the rights of Venezuelan people. China strongly condemns this. I would like to stress that the legitimate rights and interests of China and other countries in Venezuela must be protected. The United States has long imposed illegal unilateral sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector and has recently brazenly used force against Venezuela, dealing a severe blow to the country's economic and social order and also threatening the stability of global production and supply chains. China has already issued strong condemnation in this regard. I would like to reiterate that cooperation between China and Venezuela is a cooperation between sovereign states and is protected by international law and laws of both countries.
All right, Keith, if you're still with me, I would want to ask you about this grand plan that US President Donald Trump has with regards to US oil companies taking over Venezuelan oil. And in fact, he has issued a fresh threats telling Venezuela to cut ties with China, Russia and Iran. So what, I mean, the strategy of US President is clearly very simple: to cut off China, Russia and Iran, allow for Venezuelan oil reserves to be only for the purpose of American usage. Andrew, would you like to respond?
Yes. The first thing that needs to be noted is that Chinese oil imports from Venezuela amount to about 1% of Chinese consumption. So focusing on that, I think, as an explanation for why China is up in arms is wrong. China has a established practice, as do many great powers, of weaponizing international law, not treating it as a neutral framework within which they operate, but using it as a cudgel to strike other great powers. The US does this, Russia does this. I mean, Russia of all countries talking about violating international law and invading another country, really? And China is very good at playing this game. I would note, too, that Chinese commentators have gone out of their way to make a distinction between what the US has done in Venezuela and what the People's Republic of China is likely to be doing with respect to Taiwan. But that's an adjacent issue. It's not surprising at one level that every country in the world is going to say, do not violate sovereign rights because of Venezuela, because they're in the business of sovereignty. That every country claims to be sovereign, and nobody wants the undue illegal intervention in their internal affairs by a foreign power. But a lot of countries have said behind the scenes and back channels, you know, we don't like Maduro. We're glad he's gone. He wasn't really democratically elected. That was a fraudulent election. He deserved to be removed. But we don't want international law, that bedrock, the fundamental, the most important aspect, brick in the wall of international law is sovereignty, non-interference in the internal affairs of another country, unless it's sanctioned by the UN Security Council, which this wasn't, or you're using force in actual self-defense, which this wasn't.
Okay.
And it's even, yeah.
Okay, all right. On that note, I'm out of time. I thank you, Andrew, and Keith Vaz for joining me, sharing your views. On that note, I slip into a short break. Thanks for watching.